Hi, I'm Lynn Blend. I'm a drag queen, a Vtuber, and a cryptid enthusiast, and on this channel I do videos about historical true crime and mysteries. Today we're going to be looking into the mystery of one of my favorite cryptids, Mothman. Before we get started, I do just want to give a content warning for discussions of the death of a pet. Please use your discretion in watching and prioritize your mental health. The first recorded sighting of the creature that would later come to be known as Mothman happened on November 12, 1966, in Clendenin, West Virginia. This sighting was reported by a man named Kenneth Duncan. Duncan and a group of 4 other men were working in a local cemetery digging a grave when they noticed a shadowy figure, brown in color, moving rapidly between the trees. That figure was humanoid in shape, but bigger than any normal human. Just 3 days later, a man and his dog and 2 young couples would each have an encounter with Mothman in the middle of the night that would affect them for the rest of their lives. In Salem, West Virginia, Noel Partridge was settling in after a long day at his contractor job by watching some TV. His dog Bandit, a German Shepherd, was sitting outside on the front porch. At around 10:30 that night, Partridge reports his TV going dark, and then the screen filling with a strange static. Outside, he heard a loud whining noise. It was not only alarming to him, but to his dog Bandit as well, who became agitated and started howling at the noise. Partridge grabbed a flashlight and went outside to investigate the noise, with Bandit in tow. When he reached his hay barn, about 150 yards away, he saw only 2 glowing red eyes. He couldn't be sure what kind of creature the eyes belonged to, but he was sure that it wasn't an animal. Bandit suddenly ran across the yard towards the creature, barking, while Partridge ran back towards the house to get his gun. He was so overwhelmed with terror, though, that he was unable to leave the house to investigate further, so he instead went to sleep with the gun beside his bed. About 90 miles away, near Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the sighting that would kick off media coverage of this case was about to take place. Between 11:30 and midnight that night, 2 young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving in Roger's black 1957 Chevy towards an area 7 miles north of the town called the Tnt Area by the locals. We'll get to why it was called that later, but now it's known as the McClintic Wildlife Management Area, and it's a huge forest encompassing over 3,000 acres of bush, woods, and wetlands. When the couple got to the abandoned North Power Plant, Steve noticed 2 glowing red eyes reflecting the light of their headlights. Once he pointed this out to the others, the group then got a closer look at the creature that the eyes belonged to. The 4 of them saw a gray humanoid figure, at least 6 or 7 feet tall, with a pair of enormous wings folded against its back. Later, Linda would say that they were close enough to the creature that she could see the muscles in its legs. They watched the figure slowly walk around the corner of the power plant, slightly wobbling, like it was having trouble keeping its balance. Terrified by what they were seeing, Roger turned the car around on Route 62 to head back towards town, the rest of them yelling for him to go faster. To their horror, the creature then began following their car. Once they got onto the road, they saw it on a hill standing beside a billboard, and then it spread its wings and took off straight up into the air to pursue them. The next thing they saw out of the back window of the car was the creature maintaining pace with their car, its 10-foot wingspan fully extended. Its shadow passed back and forth over the car, and the couples could hear its wings scraping against the roof, and a cry that sounded like shrieking or squeaking. Roger sped along the straight stretch of Route 62, reaching up to 100 miles an hour, but even at those speeds they couldn't lose the creature. It only gave up chasing them when they reached the edge of town. Seemingly unable or unwilling to cross the city limits of Point Pleasant, it veered off into a field and turned around. Once the 4 of them reached town, and the creature was no longer pursuing them, they stopped to decide what to do next. Linda wanted to go to the police and report what they had seen, but Roger and Steve didn't think the police would believe them, so they wanted to go back and make sure what they had seen was real first. As they got out to the edge of town to get on the road and go back, they saw a large dead dog lying on the side of the road. The creature then jumped out of the woods near where they saw the dog, flew over the top of their car, and then disappeared into the field on the other side of the road. When they drove back into town, they saw that the dog's body was gone. This was enough for the 4 of them to contact the police. Deputy Millard Halstead came out to hear their story. Halstead didn't believe that the creature was real, but he saw how terrified the couple seemed, and he concluded that they weren't flying, but that they might have been mistaken about what they saw. He drove back out to the Tnt Area with them at around 2 a.m. to investigate. House had shined a spotlight all around the tree line of the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the reflective red eyes, but he found nothing. However, he did hear a strange static disturbance coming from his radio, similar to the interference Neil Partridge experienced with his TV. Back in the car, the couple saw something kick up a cloud of dust in the nearby coal yard, but were unable to see if the creature was the cause of this. Once they all came back to town, the Millettes stayed at the Scarberry's home, where the four of them stayed up all night, too scared to sleep. Back in Salem, Neil Partridge woke up and noticed that his dog, Bandit, who had run off after the creature, had never come back home. He went back out to the hay barn to investigate, but only saw Bandit's tracks in the mud going around in a circle before disappearing entirely. Bandit was never seen again, but it's theorized that it was his body that the couple saw on the side of the road, and that the creature picked him up, took him away, and presumably ate him. That morning, on November 16th, 1966, the Point Pleasant Register broke the story with an article titled, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird? Creature? Something?" I'll do a little dramatic reading of some excerpts from the article, which included an interview with Roger Scarberry and Steve Millette. "It was a bird, or something. It definitely wasn't a flying saucer. The two young men telling their story this morning were dead serious and asserted that they hadn't been drinking. It was like a man with wings," Millette said. "It wasn't like anything you'd see on TV or in a monster movie." "I'm a hard guy to scare," Scarberry said, "but last night I was for getting out of there." Both were slightly pale and tired from the lack of sleep during the night following their harrowing experience. They speculated that the thing was living in the vacant power plant, possibly in one of the huge boilers. "There are pigeons in all the other buildings," Millette said, "but not in that one." "If I'd seen it by myself, I wouldn't have said anything," Scarberry commented, "but there were four of us who saw it. They said it didn't resemble a bat in any way, but maybe what you would visualize as an angel." Once this first story broke, the previous sightings were also made public, and in the storm of media attention that followed, the newspapers gave the creature its name, Mothman. Curious tourists flooded to the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of Mothman, and several more sightings were reported within the Point Pleasant area within the next year, but none with as much detail as the Scarberry and Millette sighting. After the Mothman sightings started to get media attention, people who had witnessed the creature reported being visited by the Men in Black. I could do a whole video on the Men in Black, and I might at some point, but if you're unfamiliar, it's not just the movie with Will Smith, it's based on a supposedly real thing. The Men in Black are said to be translucently pale, with no hair, and look very similar to each other, and always wear black suits. They show up in a lot of cases of UFO sightings and other paranormal happenings, and are said to visit and intimidate witnesses into not speaking about what they saw. Several Mothman witnesses reported being visited by the Men in Black shortly after the sightings began, including Linda Scarberry. When interviewed about her experience, she said that they once visited her at her home. The MIB wore black suits, black hats, and sunglasses. They drove black cars, Cadillacs, I think. They looked like human beings, but their skin was somewhat transparent. You could see the veins in their hands very clearly. Their fingers were longer than a normal person's fingers as well. Daddy shook hands with them, and he said that they were awkward in shaking hands. They seemed to not know what to do or how to shake hands. She went on to talk about how the Men in Black would follow her in her car, saying, "One of the cars would follow us around. There were 3 men in the car. The MIB went so far as to follow us through the drive-thru of a restaurant. We were afraid to turn around and just look through the mirror at them." Steve and Mary Millette also reported an encounter with the Men in Black. They said that the pair of them showed up at their home with a camera and wanted to take a picture of the couple. The Millettes wrote down the license plate of their car, a black Volkswagen, but when they contacted the police, they told them that the license plate number didn't exist. After having seen Mothman, a number of the witnesses reported having strange side effects, including Linda Scarberry. The morning after her sighting, she was treated for shock. Her and other Mothman witnesses also reported suffering from paranoia and nightmares following the Mothman sightings. Mothman witness Connie Carpenter said that she had prolonged eye contact with Mothman's glowing red eyes. After her sighting, she was diagnosed with a type of conjunctivitis that results from prolonged exposure to UV rays. Interestingly, another Mothman witness, Marcella Bennett, reported that her encounter with Mothman had given her psychic powers. She said that she could often feel the presence of Mothman around her, and that she developed the ability to have visions and premonitions. After Linda Scarberry's Mothman sighting, she reported that she started to hear disembodied noises, and she would see items moving on their own. Other residents of the area noticed an increase in electrical equipment and cars malfunctioning, or strange static coming from devices like TVs and radios, and this was also attributed to Mothman. People would continue to report Mothman sightings around the Point Pleasant area through the rest of 1966 and 1967, until December 15th, 1967, when a local tragedy took place. That afternoon, around 5 p.m., the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, over the Ohio River, collapsed under the weight of rush hour traffic. 46 people were killed. An investigation was conducted, which concluded that the collapse was caused by a defective link in the bridge, and that the stress on that area over time caused that area of the bridge to slowly crack and eventually collapse. The reason why the Silver Bridge collapse was linked to Mothman is that after the bridge collapse, the sightings of Mothman, which had become a relatively common occurrence in the area, stopped immediately. This led local residents to speculate if Mothman was somehow connected to the bridge collapse. Some thought that Mothman had somehow caused it, some thought that he was an omen of doom, and others thought that he had predicted that the bridge would collapse, and that all the sightings leading up to it were Mothman's way of trying to warn the town that this was coming. In the years since the initial Mothman sightings in the 60s, there's been a lot of thought and study into how the creature could have come into being and what it was capable of. I mentioned earlier that the area Mothman seemed to call home was called the Tnt Area by locals, and it turns out that this area is a huge factor when it comes to theorizing about his origin story. During World War II, nearly 100 concrete domes were built in this area, which were used to manufacture and store ammunition and explosives. After the Mothman sightings, the area was investigated by the EPA in the 70s. It was determined that the ponds in this area were full of runoff pollution from hazardous waste materials being dumped there. It's theorized that Mothman could have originated from being mutated by toxic waste, although there's not really any concrete evidence to suggest that this would even be possible. It's also theorized that Mothman could have an extraterrestrial origin. During the initial time of the Mothman sightings, UFO sightings in that area also increased. The heavy involvement of the Men in Black in this story could also point to this theory, seeing as how Men in Black encounters are most commonly reported as being associated with things like UFO sightings and alien abduction encounters. A lot of the way Mothman is remembered has to do with its perceived psychic abilities. There's the theory that Mothman predicted the disaster at Silver Bridge, as well as the claims from some of the Mothman witnesses that they gained psychic powers after their encounter. Some of the reason that this is so heavily associated with the Mothman folklore is due to a book called The Mothman Prophecies by Keel, which was released in 1975. The book details Keel's investigation into the Mothman phenomenon, but it's sort of unclear how much of the story is based on the actual events and how much is based on Keel's speculation. Much of the focus on the book is on connecting Mothman to UFOs and other supernatural phenomena, as well as speculating about Mothman's ability to tell the future. The book is kind of in a gray area of science fiction and nonfiction. There was a movie based on the book that was released in 2002 and starred Richard Gere. I actually haven't seen that movie, so if you'd like for me to watch it and make a video about it, let me know. As much as I would be delighted if Mothman is real, I believe that everything has a logical explanation, so I want to bring up some of the theories that have come up to debunk the Mothman story. Some scientists and wildlife experts have suggested that what the Scarberries and the Millettes saw was actually a sandhill crane. Sandhill cranes are these massive birds, almost as tall as a man, with patches of bright red flesh around their eyes. If a sandhill crane was living in the Tnt area, it could have even become deformed from being exposed to the toxic waste. There are a couple problems with this theory, though. Sandhill cranes are not native to West Virginia, and the patches of red around their eyes would not be visible at night or be able to reflect light. Sandhill cranes also have long necks, and Mothman witnesses always describe the creature as having no neck, either with no discernible head or the head is directly connected to the body. Seeing as how descriptions of Mothman are very bird-like, there is another bird at the center of these theories, an owl. The main things that point to Mothman actually being an owl are the distinctive head shape, which is directly connected to the body with no neck, and the fact that owls' eyes reflect light at night and appear to glow. So it's pretty easy to imagine an owl's eyes reflecting the light of a car's taillights and seeming to glow red. The main problem with this theory, though, is that Mothman is described as being taller than a man, with a 10-foot wingspan, and there's just no way that an owl could get that big. Not to mention that according to Linda Scarberry's account, they got close enough to Mothman to see its legs, and an owl's legs are covered by feathers, so they wouldn't be visible at a distance. They look nothing like human legs. There is no one definitive answer we can point to as to what Mothman actually is, but it's pretty easy to doubt the claims of Mothman's psychic powers. There's not only no actual evidence to connect Mothman to the Silver Bridge collapse, but there is an actual logical explanation for that event. The Mothman witnesses reports of paranoia, nightmares, and even the delusions attributed to newly gained psychic powers could be pretty easily attributed to PTSD. These people might not have actually seen an inhuman monster, but regardless, they think that they did. And it's not hard to imagine that that kind of event, not to mention the circus of media attention on them afterwards, could be traumatizing enough for them to suffer long-lasting psychological effects. One of the things that I love the most about Mothman, and cryptids in general, is how a town will just kind of adopt them as their own, and I feel like there's no better example of that than in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Mothman is clearly their thing there. There's a huge industry of Mothman tourism in the area, even to this day. The locals of the area have definitely leaned into this. There's a Mothman Museum, Mothman tours, an annual Mothman festival, Mothman merch, everything. A statue of Mothman by artist Bob Roach was put up in 2003, and ever since I saw this thing, it has been my personal mission to show it to everyone that I can because it's just so iconic. So here you go, you're welcome. It's also very important to get a view of the back of the statue. It's a real 360 experience that you just need to like experience to believe. Let me just enhance. There we go. Perfect. I do not know what inspired Bob Roach to give Mothman six-pack abs and an ass that won't quit, but I for one will be eternally grateful that he did. The statue is also accompanied by a plaque with an inscription, so let me do a little dramatic reading of that for you. On a chilly fall night in November 1966, two young couples drove into the Tnt Area north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, when they realized that they were not alone. What they saw that night has evolved into one of the great mysteries of all time. Hence the Mothman Legacy began. It has grown into a phenomenon known all over the world by millions of curious people asking questions. What really happened? What did these people see? Has it been seen since? It still sparks the world's curiosity, the mystery behind Point Pleasant, West Virginia's Mothman. With all that said, it's clear that Mothman's legacy has endured throughout the years, and he's not going anywhere. So it's not surprising that there are still Mothman sightings being recorded all over the world. Mothman gets commonly associated with major disasters like Chernobyl and 9/11. Personally, I don't put a whole lot of stock into these types of sightings because I feel like they're mostly brought on by Mothman's reputation of having psychic powers and predicting disasters. What was really interesting to me as I was looking into the Mothman sightings in the years since the Silver Bridge collapse was that I found a lot of sightings around the Chicago area that have been reported since 2011. These sightings peaked around 2017, but there are still Mothman sightings being reported in Chicago as recently as this year. These sightings are the only ones that I could find that seem to all be localized to one area since the original sightings in the 60s, so that's really fascinating to me, and if y'all would like me to do a follow-up video on the Chicago Mothman, definitely let me know, I would love to. For now, that's the story of Mothman. Coming up next, I'll be posting my experience watching The Ring for the first time, and I'll be taking a look at the unsolved Black Dahlia murder case. Huge thank you to Salika, Smallsy, and Tofi, who are my supporters on Ko-Fi. Thanks so much. If you'd like to see all my videos early and influence future topics, you can support me on Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/spinnblend. Thanks so much for watching.